old age can be the happiest time of life. No more work pressure, no more worries about raising children, just the freedom to enjoy life as you wish. But if you're not prepared, it can also be a time of loneliness, illness, and regret. Do you want to grow old in peace or in hardship? The choice is yours, starting now. Many believe that money, health, or having filial children are the most important factors. But in reality, there are three core principles that determine the quality of life in old age. If you understand and apply them well, you'll enjoy your later years with peace of mind, free from worry, free from regret. Can you guess what those three important things are? Leave your thoughts in the comments. And stay tuned, because what I'm about to share could completely change the way you experience your later years. Before we continue, don't forget to hit like and subscribe so you won't miss valuable insights about life in old age. Your support is my motivation to bring you more meaningful content. Now let's listen to the story of a woman and the invaluable lessons from her life. To truly understand the three most important things in old age. I have a friend who once told me that she would never forget that day, the day her world collapsed. The sky was gray, and the cold wind howled through the curtains. The rain had been falling since the night before, as if the heavens themselves were mourning their fate. In a small room, she knelt beside her husband's coffin, her trembling hands brushing against the cold wooden surface. She told me she desperately wanted to believe it was just a nightmare, that when she opened her eyes, he would still be there. But no, he was gone. The man who once promised to protect her and their children forever was now lying still, never to wake again. She held her two children tightly. The older one, only 6 years old, sobbed and asked, "Mommy, is Daddy sleeping? Why won't he wake up?" The younger one, just 2, clung to his teddy bear and innocently pleaded, "Daddy, pick me up." She told me that those words shattered her heart. She wanted to cry, to scream, but she couldn't. She had to be the only pillar of strength left for her children. She remembered looking up at the hastily set up altar. Their wedding photo sat beside his memorial picture. Once, they had dreamed of a happy home together. But now, everything had vanished. She asked me, what could I do? Cry? My tears had already run dry. Mourn? I didn't have time to collapse. If I gave up, who would protect my children from life's storms? She took a deep breath, swallowed her pain, and looked into her children's eyes. At that moment, she knew. She had to stand up. No matter how cruel life was, she had to keep moving forward. Not for herself, but for them. From the day her husband passed away, she never stopped. She threw herself into work like a machine. She had no one to lean on, no time to complain or grieve. She had only her 2 hands and 2 young children. They were everything to her, the only reason she kept going. She took a job at a small garment factory. Every morning before the sun even rose, she was already up, preparing breakfast, washing clothes, cleaning the house, before rushing out the door. For 10 long hours, she sat hunched over a sewing machine, every stitch soaked in sweat. Her back ached, her eyes burned from exhaustion, but every day was the same. Work, come home, take care of her children, then work again. After her shift, she didn't go straight home. She took on extra sewing work to earn a few more coins. Each piece barely made a difference, but it was enough for food, for school fees. Every night after her children were fast asleep, she sat in front of her old sewing machine, its rhythmic clatter echoing through the small room. Sometimes she was so exhausted that she dozed off mid-stitch, only to jolt awake, terrified that if she slept too long, she wouldn't finish her orders by morning. There were days when she didn't have enough money to cover everything. She had to choose, eat a proper meal or pay for her children's school fees, and she always chose them. She skipped lunch, surviving on just water. She never bought herself new clothes, even when her old ones were worn thin. She never replaced her tattered shoes because that money could buy her children's school books. As long as her children were well-fed and warmly dressed, she felt her sacrifices were worth it. She never expected them to repay her. She only wished for them to have a better life than she did. Every morning, no matter how exhausted she was, she still woke up with a smile to send them off to school. Every night, no matter how drained she felt, she still told them bedtime stories. No one ever knew how many sleepless nights she endured, how many times she wanted to break down but couldn't. She never complained about her life. She had only one thought: no matter how hard life is for me, my children must have a good environment to grow up in. And that thought kept her going. She believed that if she just worked hard enough, one day she could finally rest. She dreamed of a day when she could let go of all her burdens and live in peace with her children. And then, slowly, her efforts started to pay off. Her eldest son was diligent and hardworking. One day, he ran home, his face beaming with pride, his eyes shining with excitement. "Mom, I got the Outstanding Student Award." She smiled, gently ruffling his hair, her heart swelling with happiness. Watching him grow each day, she knew every hardship had been worth it. Her younger son had a different passion. He wasn't into academics, but he was incredibly talented in sports. Some evenings he would rush home, breathless, his face flushed with excitement. "Mom, our team won the interschool basketball championship today." Seeing his bright, joyful smile, she felt warmth in her heart. Isn't this the happiest moment in a mother's life? Despite the struggles, she still felt at peace, because she knew her children were growing, walking the path she had sacrificed her youth to pave for them. She had always believed that when her children grew up, she would finally get to rest. She had always thought that her sacrifices would be rewarded with a peaceful old age, surrounded by her loving children. But she was wrong. She believed that a lifetime of sacrifice for her children would bring happiness. But life doesn't always work the way we think. She started noticing the changes in her children through the smallest things. Family meals became less frequent with her eldest son. At first, he would come home on weekends, then every 2 weeks, then once a month, until she could no longer remember the last time they all sat down to eat together. Her youngest son also grew distant, spending more time with his friends. The texts she sent were met with short replies. "Yes, Mom, I got it." She kept telling herself she couldn't blame them. They had grown up, they had their own families now. But deep down, she still longed for a little care, a little love, from the very children she had spent her whole life raising. And then the inevitable happened. Her eldest son settled in the city, while her youngest son got married and stayed in their hometown. On the day of her youngest son's wedding, she smiled, believing that she could finally rest, spending her old age surrounded by her children and grandchildren. But she never expected that from that day on, her life would take an entirely different turn. She moved in with her youngest son and his wife, thinking she could still help them, take care of her grandchildren, keep the family warm and connected. But soon she realized she had made a mistake. Meals became silent. Conversations revolved around her son and his wife, while she sat quietly, unnoticed, as if her opinions no longer mattered. When her grandchild was born, she was eager to help, but instead, she was reminded, "Mom, please don't force the baby to eat the old-fashioned way." "Mom, Don't hold the baby too much. She'll get too attached to you instead of her mother. Every word she said, every action she took, seemed to be wrong, misplaced. She tried to adapt, but no matter how hard she tried, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was slowly becoming an outsider in her own family. And then one day, she accidentally overheard a conversation between her son and his wife. "It's kind of inconvenient having Mom here all the time." Yeah, she should understand that we have our own plans too. Her heart sank. She had never imagined that one day she would become a burden to the very children she had once given everything for. But the most painful moment was yet to come. One evening, during dinner, her eldest son spoke up. "Mom, have you ever thought about living on your own? It might actually be more comfortable for you." She froze. She looked at the child she had once held through feverish nights, the child she had starved herself for just to pay his school fees. And now, that same child was suggesting that she should leave his home. She didn't need to ask anything else. She understood everything. That night, she couldn't sleep. Her entire life, she had sacrificed for her children. She had never thought of herself, never bought herself nice things, never done anything purely for her own happiness. And now, when she had no strength left to work, when she had nothing left to give, she was treated like an object, set aside when no longer needed. But she refused to let her life end this way. For the first time, she asked herself, "What do I want? What do I need?" And she made a decision. She would leave, not because her children pushed her out, but because she refused to live a meaningless life. She began thinking about how to become financially independent, but reality was cruel. At her age, finding a stable job was nearly impossible. She had no higher education, no professional skills, just years of homemaking and child rearing. Who would hire an old woman like her? She considered working as a housekeeper, but her health wasn't strong enough for heavy labor. She thought about taking in small sewing jobs at home, but the money was barely enough to survive. She asked herself, is there really no way out? Then she remembered something her late husband had once said. Never sell that piece of land. One day it will be worth more than you think. She had long forgotten about that small plot of land he had bought in a remote countryside. Back then, she thought it was a meaningless investment, a piece of barren land no one cared about. But now, she had nothing left to lose. She quickly called a real estate company to inquire about the land. The agent's voice suddenly changed, filled with surprise. "Ma'am, are you thinking of selling it? The value has skyrocketed." She was stunned. It turned out that the area had been included in a new urban development plan. The government had just announced major projects there, and land prices had multiplied tenfold. She immediately sold the land, and when the money was transferred to her account, she couldn't believe her eyes. Never in her life had she imagined having so much money. She, who had once starved to save every penny for her children, who had worried about not having enough savings for old age, now held enough to completely change her life. She stared at the phone screen, her fingers trembling. Is this really my money? But the biggest surprise came from her own children. When news of her newfound wealth reached them, something strange happened. The same children who had been too busy to call suddenly flooded her with messages and phone calls. "Mom, how are you? Do you need anything? Mom, let's have dinner together this weekend. Mom, don't live alone. Come stay with us. We're worried about you." She chuckled. For the first time in her life, she realized a harsh truth. When you have money, you are no longer a burden. But this time, She was no longer the same weak, self-sacrificing woman. One day, her eldest son visited and hesitantly asked, "Mom, do you want to come live with us? It must be lonely on your own." She looked at him, calm and unbothered. She no longer held resentment, no longer felt anger. She simply smiled and said, "No, I think living alone is much more comfortable." For the first time, she said no to her children. For the first time, she chose to live for herself. But she didn't want to just sit around and spend money meaninglessly. She wanted to do something meaningful, not to prove anything to anyone, but simply because she wanted to enjoy life in her own way. So she opened a small restaurant. Cooking had always been her passion, but all her life, she had only cooked for her family, never thinking she could turn it into a real business. Now she could, not for anyone else, but because she loved it. At first, she only served simple dishes with a modest menu. But to her surprise, customers loved her food. A young customer shared a post about her restaurant online, praising it as the coziest home-style eatery. Then, one day, a famous YouTuber visited her restaurant and featured it in a video. Before long, a TV station reached out for an interview. Her small restaurant became more popular than she ever imagined. She made more money than she ever had before. But this time, she wasn't working to sacrifice for anyone. She was earning money to enjoy the life she truly deserved. She once thought that having money and doing what she loved meant her life was finally complete. People came to her restaurant not just for the comforting, home-cooked meals, but also for the story behind the woman who had rebuilt her life from nothing. She cherished every moment, serving customers, chatting with them about the simple joys of life. She had forgotten what loneliness felt like. She no longer dwelled on the pain of being seen as a burden by her children. That day, the restaurant was packed. As always, she was busy in the kitchen, carefully tasting each dish, keeping an eye on her staff, and sharing laughter with her guests. But suddenly, she felt dizzy. Her hands trembled as she held the knife to chop vegetables. Cold sweat dripped down her forehead. The world around her blurred. She tried to steady herself by gripping the kitchen counter, but she no longer had the strength. She collapsed. Everything went dark. She woke up in the hospital. Her employees sat by her bedside, their faces filled with worry. The doctor came in, his voice firm and serious. "You need to change your lifestyle immediately. If not, next time, it won't be this simple." She was silent. All her life, she had cared for her children. And when she finally had money, she had thrown herself into work, forgetting that without health, none of it mattered. For the first time, she made a decision. She would take care of herself. She began learning to slow down. She no longer skipped breakfast because she was too busy. She no longer drank coffee as a substitute for lunch. She focused on eating well, choosing foods that nourished her body. She signed up for a gentle yoga class, learning how to breathe, how to listen to her body. She had always been afraid of hospitals, but now she made it a priority to go for regular health checkups. She refused to wait until her body collapsed, before realizing she had neglected herself for too long. Every morning she took a 30-minute walk. She inhaled the fresh air, observed the world around her, things she had never paid attention to before. For the first time in years, she felt stronger. Her mind felt at peace. She understood something deeply. Money can always be earned, but health, once lost, is gone forever. One evening after closing her restaurant, her phone rang. A deep voice came through the receiver. "Hello, ma'am. We're from a reality TV program. We've heard about your story and would love to invite you to share it on our show." She froze. At first, she hesitated. She had never imagined herself in front of a camera. She had never thought her story could inspire anyone. But then she reconsidered. She had spent her whole life staying silent. She had lived according to the expectations of others, never once speaking up for herself. If today she could help someone out there realize the value of life, then why not? She accepted the invitation. As she stepped onto the stage, the lights shone brightly on her face. Hundreds of eyes watched her. In the past, she would have been terrified of such attention. She would have worried about what people thought of her. But now she was no longer that weak, self-sacrificing woman. She picked up the microphone, took a deep breath, and looked out at the audience. And then, she spoke. There are only 3 things that truly determine our quality of life in old age. It took me a lifetime to understand this. First, financial independence. I once believed that if I sacrificed everything for my children, they would take care of me in return. But one day, when I had nothing left, I realized a harsh truth. If you don't have money, you don't have control over your own life. When I was poor, I was seen as a burden. But when I had money, my children suddenly cared again. That's when I understood. Money doesn't buy love, but it gives you the power to live on your own terms. Take control of your finances, not to be rich, but to ensure that no one else can dictate your life. Second, health. When I finally had money, I threw myself into work, forgetting one crucial thing. Without health, money means nothing. I used to think I was still strong, that I could endure just a little more. But then one day, I collapsed in my own kitchen. That was when I realized, if I don't take care of myself, no one else will. Since then, I started exercising, eating properly, going for regular checkups, not for anyone else, but because I want to truly live. Don't wait until you're lying in a hospital bed to realize you've neglected yourself for too long. Third, meaningful relationships and personal fulfillment. I once thought that family was all I needed. But then, my children grew up and built lives of their own. I realized that if I didn't build my own connections, if I didn't find joy in my own passions, I would be left alone in my old age. So I learned to make new friends. I found happiness in simple pleasures, reading, cooking, traveling. I stopped waiting for my children's calls. I was no longer the mother sitting by the phone, hoping my children would remember me. I became a woman who was free to live life on my terms. She paused. Looking around the room, she saw faces deep in thought. She saw heads nodding in agreement. She took a deep breath and said, "So to everyone listening to my story today, don't live only to sacrifice for others. Live for yourself. Protect your finances. Take care of your health. Build meaningful relationships. Because in the end, no one else can live your life for you." For a moment, the room fell silent. Then applause erupted, thunderous, overwhelming. For the first time in her life, she felt she was no longer living in the shadows. She had stepped into the light, not for anyone else, but for herself. Old age is not the end. It can be a new beginning, a chance to live life the way you truly desire. But to have a peaceful, independent, and fulfilling old age, you must start preparing now. So, are you ready to take charge of your future? What do you think is the most important factor? Share your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear them. And if you found this story valuable, hit like to help spread this message to more people. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss any more meaningful insights on living a fulfilling old age. Thank you for watching. And remember, live for yourself, because old age is not an ending. It's an opportunity to enjoy life the way you deserve.